Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about the next big Nintendo game. Right now, officially speaking, what we know about is Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave in September, Nintendo Switch Sports Resort in October, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time for sometime this year, probably November, but that's not officially set in stone yet. Then there's the Dusk, which for a while was slated for 2026, now we're not entirely sure, we'll see what happens with that one as well. And then we have the Switch 2 edition for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 due in December. And as far as I'm aware, that's all that's currently slated to come out this year by Nintendo. However, in 2027, we have Pokemon Winds and Waves. We're not entirely sure when that's coming out either in the year. I would have thought perhaps earlier in the year, however, more recent leaks have been suggesting later into the year. We shall see. That would definitely be a huge Nintendo game. Pokemon's always on a significant level, likely to be a top 10 selling game for the generation. And then there's also Xenoblade Genesis, which could be the biggest Xenoblade game in the series, at least from we've seen the trailer. It does look like they're putting out the biggest, most ambitious world yet, which is very exciting. But the Xenoblade series is kind of niche. Would we call that the next big Nintendo game? And even if it is, when is that coming out? Really right now, the next big Nintendo game is Ocarina of Time, but I'm talking about what's to come out after that. Ocarina of Time is probably going to be Nintendo's big holiday release. Like I said, likely coming out in November. We'll see when it's actually confirmed. And then after that, what's that next big game that Nintendo's going to be putting out that they really feel is like a huge showcase for the console, that's like that killer app kind of game? And so we could talk about things like Dusk, like Xenoblade Genesis, but there are other games that are unannounced that likely would be even bigger successes that would definitely be a huge draw for the console. And so when might we see that next really big Nintendo game? That's what I want to dive into today. Now before continuing, let me ask that if you find yourself enjoying my videos and you haven't subscribed already, I would very much appreciate your subscription. So first I want to talk a little bit about the games we already know about, that we don't have set release dates for, just to kind of give you an idea of when I think they are coming. And also to highlight that I do think they are pretty significant games, even though I think there are even bigger games that are looming, one in particular that I've been waiting for a very long time, which we'll be diving into a bit later into the video. Before that though, the Dusk. The Dusk, multiple times we've heard iterated would be coming out in 2026, however, in the most recent June Nintendo Direct, when they announced the network test, they did not reiterate that it would be coming out in 2026. They didn't give us a lot of confidence in that moment that the game is still slated for this year. All we know about is the network test, which we'll be playing later into this month, and we're sure going to be learning a lot more about the game with this network test. But that's all we know, and so there is reason to perhaps be a little skeptical of the game making it out this year. It doesn't seem like the Dusk will make it out for September, and I feel like even October at this point is seeming a little unlikely. November is when we're going to be getting Ocarina of Time, and I'm not trying to say we can't see more than one Nintendo game in a month, especially during the holiday season, because actually we usually do. But with Grand Theft Auto also coming out during this month, and with the Dusk being a huge third-party title that Nintendo is publishing, that game you would think would be trying to draw in a core audience that's typically not playing on Nintendo. So with GTA coming out in that same month, especially with also Ocarina of Time coming out for Switch 2, I feel like it's probably a fairly safe bet to make that the Dusk will not be a November release. Now, could it be a December release? Some people think that would be too late into the year for the game to see its greatest potential success, and so maybe they would shy away from coming out in that month. However, we have seen some games come out from Nintendo that have been very successful in December, such as Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the best-selling game in the series so far, and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, the most successful fighting game ever released. Both of those were December releases. Now, Metroid Prime 4 also was a December release last year, and it doesn't seem like that game is selling as well as we would have hoped. But regardless, we have seen time and again that Nintendo is willing to put out significant releases in the month of December, not just casual offerings like Fitness Boxing, which we've seen a few times. So I'm not ruling out December, especially because when we consider the timing of this network test, and we compare it to Night Rain, a similar release by From Software, the gap of time, if the Dusk were to be coming out December, would be a similar window of time. So if the Dusk is going to truly make it out this year, December is actually my bet at this point. However, maybe they do wait a little bit longer and push the Dusk to like a January or February release which I don't think is out of the question and wouldn't be that much later, and perhaps they would be thinking they could put out a very successful early release, as we've seen many companies do before, including Nintendo. Really, I feel like we've seen successful games come out pretty much every month of the year from Nintendo, so I don't think we should necessarily rule out any potential month. But yes, the Duskbloods has huge potential here. This is a From Software title. They have very successful games, especially after the release of Elden Ring. Now, From Software has become far more popular, so this exclusive Duskbloods title has some serious potential. But another announced title that actually might be coming out a bit sooner than some are expecting, that I also think has more potential than people are expecting, is Xenoblade Genesis. So something that I think is worth noting is that throughout this year, we've actually seen different Switch 2 editions come out for the Xenoblade series. We saw a Switch 2 edition for Xenoblade Chronicles X earlier in the year. We got the next one for Xenoblade 1 with the June Direct, and just recently the Xenoblade 2 one has come out, and in December we'll be seeing the Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Switch 2 edition. So Nintendo will have released all 4 Switch 2 editions for every Xenoblade game. And I find that very interesting because they're putting out all this new content, all this enhanced content this year, reminding people of the Xenoblade series, getting a few more people to play it in preparation for Xenoblade Genesis, which has now been announced and is coming out at some point in 2027. But given that it was announced in the June Direct and not a September Direct, I think we should be considering the possibility here that Xenoblade Genesis could be coming out in the first half of 2027. I don't think we should be ruling that out, especially because they made sure to get out all the Switch 2 editions for the Xenoblade series this year. They could have spaced things out a little bit more and allowed maybe Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to come out early on next year, but that's not what's happening. It's coming out this December. That said, I still don't feel very confident in saying that Xenoblade Genesis would be coming out by the end of the fiscal year, which would be by the end of March of 2027. However, by this point, we do not know what Nintendo has slated for the early parts of the year. We would probably learn about that in a September Nintendo Direct, as we usually do. So we'll have a clearer picture once September comes around, but Xenoblade Genesis is a pretty significant game in my opinion. As I talked about in my trailer analysis for Xenoblade Genesis, when you take a look at the world, it almost looks like you're in like this giant reverse sphere, and the scale of it seems to be on a level far beyond what we've seen from other Xenoblade games, and the Xenoblade games have been known for significant scale, perhaps the most impressive scale we've seen from Nintendo overall. So when considering what we've seen in Xenoblade Genesis, it's seemingly being beyond that, I think that's pretty cool, and Nintendo might be setting things up here for Xenoblade Genesis to become the most successful game in the series. I think it's actually interesting that they've dropped the Chronicles moniker. This is going to be kind of like a reboot for this series, a new beginning, and with that may come a new audience. And so perhaps Xenoblade Genesis could reach another level and be considered that next big Nintendo game. Now, I already mentioned Pokemon Winds and Waves. Obviously, that's going to be huge. We're not entirely sure when that comes out in the year. But let's now dive into games that have not been announced yet that would be big releases. I'm not going to speculate on smaller things right now. I'm talking about big things. Big things that are probably going to be bigger than the Duskbloods or Xenoblade Genesis, even though I have hope that those will be pretty successful. Something that comes to mind is Animal Crossing. Now, considering the huge casual focus with Nintendo this year with Pokopia and Tomodachi Life, I feel like that audience has been satiated. I don't know if they want to rush out Animal Crossing, especially because they also had the big Animal Crossing update earlier this year. Also, the EPD group behind Animal Crossing also works on Splatoon, and Splatoon Raiders just came out this year, and now Splatoon Raiders is a spin-off, not as big as a whole new Splatoon game. And we've learned that Splatoon Raiders had quite a bit of support work by different other Nintendo teams like Monolith Soft and Nintendo of Singapore. Also, the Animal Crossing Splatoon EPD team can work on both games at the same time. So I'm not trying to sit here and say that the next Animal Crossing is very far off. I'm not saying that. I actually think it's probably closer than some are imagining, but I don't think it's going to be the next big Nintendo game. And I realize maybe because I was talking about Xenoblade Genesis, there might be a bit of confusion here in terms of what I mean by the next big Nintendo game. To be clear, I'm talking about a game that probably has the potential to be a top 10 seller on Switch 2. Xenoblade Genesis and the Duskbloods probably won't be. The Duskbloods maybe, because it's a From Software title, but given that it's an exclusive for Switch 2, I think that definitely dampens its sales potential by a significant degree. So what other game that hasn't been announced yet, that isn't Animal Crossing, could be that next game that's like a top 10 seller? Well, another that comes to mind is Smash Brothers. Now, the issue with Smash Brothers is that Sakurai put out Kirby Air Riders late last year, and Sakurai would be the head of the next Smash Bros. Release, as he always has been. So it's hard to believe he's been hard at work this entire time, all hands on deck for the next Smash Brothers, which has me skeptical that it would be coming out really soon. The next new one. A totally brand new one. But I also think it's important that Smash Brothers, one of Nintendo's biggest series, is involved early on with Switch 2. And there has been no announcement of any sort of special Switch 2 edition for Smash Brothers, and there's been a lot of Switch 2 editions for different games announced. Now, maybe they will announce one soon. Maybe this Switch 2 edition will have some significant new content. That's very plausible. But I want to go back to something said by friend of the channel, Reese Kiwi Talks Riley, where he said this on Twitter on May 3rd of 2026. This would be before the big June Direct where certain things were confirmed. So here, Kiwi says, "These are my 4 favorite game franchises of all time, and it's great that I know all 4 IPs have stuff coming either soon or in a year or 2, which I would still consider to be fairly soon. GTA 6 in November, another Metroid game on the near horizon. Keep in mind the date of when this was posted. A few months later, we got the leak from the Brazilian government that Nintendo of America submitted for a rating of Metroid Ravenous, which we assume is a follow-up to Metroid Dread, the next brand new 2D Metroid title." So Kiwi was probably talking about this. Continuing though, Smash Bros. In the next year or 2, and another Zelda game and the movie in 2027. So the Ocarina of Time remake, which we sort of assumed would be getting announced really soon, but wasn't confirmed until June. I assume that's what Kiwi was talking about here, and then the movie we already knew was coming out in 2027. So outside of the Metroid thing, the other bit of new information being suggested here would be a Smash game in the next year or 2. Now, scrolling down, he elaborates a bit more. "People are misquoting me again. Nowhere in the tweet did I say any of these games are new. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But I was vague for a good reason, to protect devs. It could be new. It could be a spin-off. It could be a remaster. It could be something on NSO. Don't jump the gun and get ahead of yourselves." So really, I just read this as, let's not assume that everything he's saying here is going to be a totally brand new title. In the case of Zelda, we know that it's going to be the ambitious Ocarina of Time remake. The Metroid thing, I assume, is Metroid Ravenous, but, you know, we have had the rumors of a Super Metroid remake, so that's something else to consider. I'll also note that Kiwi did use a Samus render from Metroid Prime 4, so maybe he's thinking more so about Metroid Prime than just 2D Metroid, and if so, what might that be? Maybe a Metroid Prime 2 remastered? Kensuke Tanabe, the now retired Prime series producer, in the visual retrospective art book that came out shortly before Metroid Prime 4, did indicate he would like to see Metroid Prime 2 remade or remastered. So perhaps it's something like that, but that wouldn't be something I would consider a very major release. Smash Brothers, as I was just talking about though, maybe there's something going on there. It doesn't quite make sense to expect a brand new Smash Brothers really soon, but an enhanced version of Smash Bros. Ultimate where they build on top of it, maybe a Switch 2 edition or like a deluxe of some kind, it being repackaged with some new characters and stages, maybe a new mode or 2 with enhanced visuals and performance, and also a better online setup, I think that's something Nintendo could get away with and have some pretty good success. Would they have the same level of success as a Mario Kart 8 Deluxe? No, I don't think that, and that's for several reasons. One, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe came out very early on for Switch 1, that second month of the console's life. 2, the Wii U was not a very popular console, didn't sell that much, so the initial release of Mario Kart 8 only reached a relatively small audience. So if Nintendo were to give Smash Ultimate a similar treatment, I think the circumstances wouldn't lead to as successful of a release, but it still could be something they could put out there, or they could simply treat it as a Switch 2 edition with an expansion content, maybe announcing a Fires Past Volume 3. I think that would go over really well, and a lot of people would be involved and invested in that. But do we consider that a major release if it's just a Smash Ultimate expansion? There's plenty of room for debate there. Really though, the next big game, the game that I really had on my mind when deciding to make this particular video, is the next 3D Mario. And we are so overdue. Looking at the history of 3D Mario releases, we are looking at the longest gap between 3D Marios ever. Mario 64 came out in 1996, and then we had to wait all the way until 2002 for Mario Sunshine, a pretty significant gap, 6 years, that was long. But we got Mario Galaxy in 2007, that was a 5-year gap, and then Mario Galaxy 2 in 2010. Then for 3DS, we got 3D Land, if you want to count that, and in 2013 we got 3D World on the Wii U, so there wasn't that much of a gap there, it was even shorter. And then 4 years later, we got Mario Odyssey, the most successful 3D Mario game to date. And then 4 years after that, we got Bowser's Fury, which was just a little bit of an expansion to a remastered version of 3D World. So we didn't even get a brand new 3D Mario 4 years later, and we haven't gotten anything else new 3D Mario since, and now we are in 2026. It's been 5 years since the Bowser's Fury expansion, again, not a new 3D Mario, and obviously 3D Mario is not coming out this year, right? Which positions us for hopefully a 2027 release. Now some people are going to bring up, well, the 3D Mario team worked on Donkey Kong Bonanza, doesn't that count? And well, I don't think it counts because Donkey Kong is not 3D Mario, they are two different things. And we've already seen from the credits and different reports that not the entire 3D Mario team has been working on Bonanza. The suggestion being that there are now two separate teams. It may be the case that they are still within the same EPD group, but it might be kind of like how things are handled with Animal Crossing Splatoon being made by the same EPD group. And regardless, it's been a very long time. What we have gotten since 2017 from the 3D Mario developers is not enough to satiate that need for 3D Mario. We are way overdue. This has been the longest gap between totally brand new 3D Marios ever. If we have to wait all the way until October of 2027 to get the next 3D Mario, that would be 10 years. And what I find increasingly interesting about this topic is that earlier in the year, we had different insiders talk about how they expected 3D Mario this year. Nate the Hate predicted 3D Mario would be coming out this year, and a lot of his predictions ended up actually being leaks, but not 3D Mario. Also, Nash Weedle, who I know people have a lot more skepticism for, but has also leaked out some pretty substantial projects over the years and a lot of third-party projects as well, was also talking about a 3D Mario reveal happening in a Direct in March, which did not happen. But it makes me wonder, what if the reason why it did not happen is because maybe there was a plan at one point for this to happen, but because it wasn't quite ready, they changed things around. Some might think it was always the plan for Ocarina of Time Remake to come out this year to celebrate Zelda's 40th anniversary. That may be the case. But I also don't think we should assume that Nintendo was always only going to put out one of these games. I think there are scenarios where they could have put out both. I think there are various factors that would impact their decision making here. Maybe 3D Mario isn't ready, and so that's the reason why. Or maybe it could have been ready, but Nintendo looked at the market and considered everything else that was happening, like maybe GTA 6 coming out, or the price of Switch 2 coming up, or just the kind of expendable income people have right now, and they decided to hold off on that. There are a few different considerations to be had here. Regardless, it seems like there are insiders that have been hearing that 3D Mario is not that far off. It makes sense to think that 3D Mario is not that far off, because historically speaking, 3D Mario is always available early on into every Nintendo generation, and with it not coming out this year, that's already the longest wait we've had for a new generation. We are currently in the longest gap between 3D Marios ever. 3D Mario is obviously one of Nintendo's most successful series. This would be a top 10 seller on Switch 2 almost certainly, and we have a pretty good amount of understanding to believe that Donkey Kong Bonanza didn't take away so many resources from 3D Mario development, that 3D Mario should just be years away. That just wouldn't make sense. I don't think Nintendo would make a decision like that because of how important 3D Mario actually is. And so I think there's actually a pretty big possibility that 3D Mario could be announced relatively soon and could be that next big Nintendo title. Might come out before Pokemon Winds and Waves even. If what we heard is true about Pokemon Winds and Waves coming out later on into the year, maybe Nintendo wants to have something else super substantial in the first half of 2027. If I had to place my bets, I would say that 3D Mario would probably be coming out in the second half of 2027, just because usually that's when we see 3D Mario. It's usually something Nintendo would like to save for that holiday season. And so I think most likely actually Pokemon Winds and Waves and 3D Mario could be like that huge 1-2 punch for the holidays of 2027. And we could be looking at things like Xenoblade Genesis as being a bigger release for the first half of the year. But there could also be some other surprises, maybe like that Smash Switch 2 edition or something like that we discussed earlier in this video. Maybe the Dusk Buds does end up sliding a little bit later on into the early parts of 2027. But what do you all think? What do you think is that next big Nintendo title? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.